So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Ann Polano, who is the program chair for the Adirondack Mountain Club. She's going to talk about the club and also introduce our speakers for this evening.
Hi everyone, my name is Ann Polano. I just took over from Sarah King as program chair for the Glensfall Saratoga chapter of the ADK. Just before I introduce our program, I had just one announcement. I wanted to just let everyone know that our annual Band Film Festival will go ahead this year in a virtual format, and to let everyone know to check the website next week for information, and we hope that it will be available to purchase and screen from about Thanksgiving. So that's about it, and without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jack and Lenore Reber.
Okay, thank you, Anne. Welcome to our presentation, Hiking Hadrian's Wall. We are Jack and Lenore Reber, and we're happy to share our excellent trip in Northern England with you. We wish we could give our talk live, but we trust that you had no trouble parking. We'd like to thank Chris Alexander for hosting this talk and helping us navigate the tech. We'd also like to thank our friend Karen for providing some of the photos, and Leon for giving us the daily mileage as we went along. It was nice to have friends with us when we did this. We'd also like to thank Claudia for her book and map, which we read each night to prepare for the next day. We traveled with Sierra Club, whose trips we highly recommend. They have knowledgeable and well-prepared leaders, good but not lavish accommodations, and many trip choices. We've done 8 trips with Sierra Club, and this one was from June 16th to July 1st, 2019. Hadrian's Wall Path is a unique through hike because museums and historic sites added to the pleasure of daily hiking. The path is 84 miles long, but we did 120 miles total with added walking to our accommodations and historic sites off the path. We did it in 13 days, a reasonable amount of time. The terrain was mostly flat with rolling hills.
We left a day early in case there were train problems, but the transportation was very easy. We also thought we would relax, which we didn't. And we wanted to stay in a medieval city, and Durham is just outside of Newcastle. So we made accommodation reservations at a 14th century Lumley castle, and we thought it was in Durham. So when we got to Durham, we tried to find it, and we found that it was really in the town of Chester-le-Street. So we took a taxi to the castle, and it was well worth it. It felt very medieval, except it was clean and it had new bathrooms. The hosts were very helpful, and they told us how we could get to the town of Chester-le-Street and find a restaurant. So we walked through this lovely park and through some winding streets in the town and had a delicious dinner. The next morning, we had a brief tour of the castle, and our host told us how we could walk down to town and get a bus, which was much less expensive, and we soon arrived in Durham.
This is Durham Cathedral, built from 1093 to 1133. We began our visit at the Visitor Center, where we saw an introductory movie about St. Cuthbert, who was the founder of the city. The fun thing was the characters were Lego figures in the movie. We couldn't park our luggage because of terrorist restrictions, so we took turns guarding the bags outside while the other one toured the interior. We also like architecture, and this is a typical medieval cathedral with a vaulted ceiling. You'll notice the columns on either side of the picture. This was a little unusual. They had herringbone designs in the ones in the middle and long fluted ones in the foreground. We enjoyed a delicious lunch of parsnip, rosemary, and honey soup in the cafe.
After finishing touring the cathedral, we rolled our suitcases through Durham and to the train station and had very easy connections to get to Whitley Bay, a old seaside resort on the North Sea. We did our typical Sierra Club meet and greet, and then we all walked down to the North Sea to the beach and the promenade and a delicious dinner.
The next day, we went on a shakedown hike of 10 miles to the Roman supply depot of Arbea before we tackled Hadrian's Wall path. We walked along the North Sea and took a ferry across the River Tyne. Arbea means Arab in Latin. The soldiers who were stationed here were mostly from the Fertile Crescent or modern-day Iraq. The historic sites along the path featured different aspects of Roman Britain, so that by the end of the trip, we had learned a lot about Roman and medieval Britain. You can see a reconstructed gatehouse in the background with the two red-roofed towers. Arbea was built in AD 163, 41 years after the wall. In the foreground, you see ruins of granaries which stored the grain imported from Holland. In the background, you see the reconstructed commander's quarters with the white building with the red roof.
The next morning, we did our typical beginning of the day with Sierra Club. We had breakfast at our B&B, and then our host provided a range of foods to make lunch, cold cuts, fruits and vegetables, and snacks. And we would pack up what we wanted and put that in our day bag, along with rain gear and whatever else we wanted to carry for the day. We also would leave our luggage in the lobby, and then each day it was taken to our next accommodation, and that worked out very smoothly. On the right side of the picture, you can see a gray-haired woman. That is Melinda. She was our guide, and before she led us, she spent 2 years hiking the trail, finding the best restaurants and accommodations, and we really appreciated all her work. And the man in the orange was Pepe. He was her assistant and did a great job of assisting.
We got a passport, which was a handy way to track our progress. We hiked from east to west. There were 7 stamping stations. The stamps have a likeness of Hadrian. We began the path in the appropriately named town of Wall's End at the Roman site of Segedunum. The site featured a museum and an observation tower. When Lenore got off her throne, we began a 15-mile day of hiking.
The beginning of the hike was really along a bike path. There are no ruins available or visible at this point in the hike. We soon came to Newcastle. Newcastle was named Newcastle because they built a new castle in 1168 to replace the old castle, which had been built in 1080. Nowadays, Newcastle has 800,000 people. They have a new waterfront called Quayside, which has restaurants and shops and small gardens. It also has 7 very distinct bridges across the River Tyne. Our favorite was the low one that you see in the foreground, which is a pedestrian bridge, and it looked like a boomerang going from shore to shore. After 15 miles, we arrived at Keelman's Pub. We were very happy to be there. They had great food and very nice accommodations, which was true for every place that we stopped.
Well, here's the wall. The Romans had trouble with a northern tribe they called the Caledones. The emperor realized that it was taking too many, whoops.
Can we
go back to the wall? There we go. Thank you. The emperor realized it was taking too many troops to subdue the north, so a border was drawn and the Romans began to fortify it. Some turf walls were built, but in AD 122, Emperor Hadrian decided to build a wall of 84 English miles long to form a border with Scotland. It took 6 years to complete. The eastern half was stone, the western half was turf, and later the western part was rebuilt in stone. It was 20 feet high, little less than 10 feet wide, and had a 4-foot deep foundation. The wall is smaller today because locals use the stones for building and fences. The stones were quarried and dressed to a size of 10 by 20 by 6 inches. They were laid with mortar and filled with rubble in between. There was a 20-foot wide ditch on the north side, dug out and topped with a false floor. Underneath were sharpened vertical spikes that impaled anything that approached the wall.
Did you see here?
Many English paths go through pastures. The farmers get subsidies for maintaining them. Hikers are responsible for making sure the gate is closed and respecting livestock. We respected this bull.
We continued our day going through sheep fields, villages, along a modern wall made from the old wall stones and the old wall. By noon, we had arrived at an inn. We sat outside of picnic tables and ate the lunch we had prepared. And then we went inside and bought caramel chocolate shortbread and sparkling lemonade. There were many places for treats along the way. We came upon this old church, St. Oswald's, and each day almost we came across some unique small church. St. Oswald's was built to commemorate a 7th century defeat of the Celts by the Anglo-Saxons, which allowed the spread of Christianity across northern England. We also got a chance to relax in the cemetery, enjoy the Celtic crosses and the view across the countryside, the woods and the fields and the famous English hedgerows.
The Romans built turrets along the wall to monitor activity on either side. There were 10 men stationed in each turret. They must have been real serious about surveillance because there are at least 200 observation structures along the wall. This is Chester's Roman fort, one of 15 forts along the wall. This one was built near the river Tyne. It held about 500 cavalrymen and was shaped like a playing card with rounded corners. The barracks were close to the ends and the headquarters were in the middle. It also contained stables and storehouses. There were 19 towers around the perimeter for surveillance. The wall came up to one side of the fort and continued on the other.
It seemed as though each historic site had one particular aspect of it very well excavated. In Chester's Roman fort, the excavation for the Roman bath was really quite interesting. If you notice in that first forward room, there are sort of stubby pillars. Those pillars held a tile floor that was sometimes lined with lead. The Romans would heat a fire by the bottom of the the wall, and then force warm air under the floor. Then they would also heat water and have the water flow on top of the floor. And the Romans would sit on benches and enjoy their time there. They built the baths down by a water source, in this case, the River Tyne. And then the water could flow right back into the river. There was also a museum at almost every historic site. And this particular museum held a lot of stones that had been excavated from the area. If you notice on the lower shelf, the middle stone is a fat phallus, which indicated prosperity.
We stayed at Hadrian Hotel, which was appropriately located in the town of Wall. This is typical of places to stay along Hadrian's Wall path. Here I had my first serving of but not my last, of my favorite English dessert, hot sticky toffee pudding. June is a delightful time to visit the UK. The wildflowers were with us every day. These are monkey flowers. We come to the highest part of the path, Windsill, or just the sill, a fault line in this part of England. It was the steepest part of the path to hike. This photo shows how the Romans used geography to support their wall. There was a 120-foot wide ditch on the south side of the wall that was it had 10-foot berms on either side. They're not exactly sure. Oh, it's called the vallum. They're not exactly sure why the purpose of this. One theory is that the Romans were trying to keep their eyes on the Britons to the south. Another one was that they might be able to catch Roman deserters who might want to flee the cold, lonely duty. It's difficult to see that in the photo because the farmers have reworked the land.
At the end of the day, we arrived at Housesteads, another historic site. This was a hilltop fort. It encompassed about 5 acres and had about 800 men. In Chester Roman Fort, the best excavated part was the latrine. If you look at the bottom left of the photo, you'll see a picture of what the latrine would have looked like 2,000 years ago. It was a unisex latrine, and the Romans would sit on benches, and there would be a gutter below that would carry the waste away from them. This is a panorama of Vindolanda, considered to be the premier historic site along the wall. Vindolanda was a village and a fort, and it was built before the wall. I'm going to take just a minute to talk about Romans in Britannia. They invaded in AD 43. They pushed and spread their influence back north almost as far as the present Hadrian Wall. As the needs of the empire changed over the next 80 years, they would pull soldiers out to be sent to other parts of the empire, or send soldiers into Britannia to subdue more of the hostile tribes. In about 100 AD, Trajan, Emperor Trajan, decided that it would be important to really subdue these tribes and make the Roman presence very well known. So he sent in more soldiers and had several forts built, especially those guarding the trade routes. Emperor Hadrian, who was a relative of Trajan, decided that he would continue Trajan's push into Britannia. Hadrian actually went to Britannia, checked out the area, and decided that a wall should be built from the North Sea at the mouth of the River Tyne to the Irish Sea at the mouth of the River Eden. Now let's go back to Vindolanda. It has excellent excavations, an archaeological dig, guides and presenters right in the ruins, making it come alive. It has a very large museum, and one of the most interesting things that we saw in the museum was postcard-sized, very thin wooden pieces that were used for writing, and they found 1,900 of them, and they really showed what life must have been like at Vindolanda. One said that a mother was sending underwear to her son so he could stand the terrible cold in northern Britannia. Some were official reports. One was a birthday invitation, some were school homework, and some were love letters. Have we mentioned food? Most of the historic sites also have cafes. We had sweet potato and butternut squash soup, quiche, and then we sat by a bench by a gurgling stream and watched some birds, a dipper and a blue tit, enjoy the splashing in the water.
After having hiked about 50 miles since Wall's End, we came to the town and inn of Twice Brewed and stayed there for 2 nights while exploring housesteads in Vindolanda. We were curious about how it got its name, and we discovered that either it was because they had strong ale there, or the 2 hills nearby called Brews. You see in the picture there's a road, and it was kind of funny, the bus route was called AD 122, which is when Hadrian began the wall. Our innkeepers had a sense of humor. Our trip featured glorious weather. We had carried rain gear every day, but we only needed it briefly one day. I like the one that says stone jumping up and down, earthquake. You can see that. Mm-hmm.
The next morning, we took a taxi back to Housesteads and started heading west again. As you can see, it's a drizzly, misty day. We actually used our ponchos for a little bit of the way. And it was also a day of hiking up and down the steep crags. Jack is standing in front of a mile castle. 32 men would man the mile castle. And between each mile castle, there were 2 turrets. So you can see the Romans guarded the Hadrian Wall area very, very much. If you look toward the back of the photo, you'll see the parts of an arch. And the archaeologists used that to project the height of a mile castle. There's also a gate there facing north, which indicates that the Roman soldiers did some trading with the northern tribes. This was a day of drizzle, which you might think dampened our spirits, but not at all, because it made the foxgloves and the grasses sparkle. We continued walking west, passing along the old wall and the modern wall, turrets, a quarry, and fantastic views. The crags were very interesting in their rock formations. We also came upon part of a reconstructed wall. John Clayton, in late 19th century, bought 4 forts and some of the wall. And he realized that it was being destroyed by people taking the stones or walking on top of the wall. In order to protect it, he reconstructed some of the wall, but he didn't use mortar and he didn't put rubble in between the stones, so it wasn't exactly like the Romans did. But he added turf to the top, and that did protect the wall from further destruction. It also highlighted to the Britons what an important historic site this is, and made the Britons realize that they needed to do something to protect it and their history. Archaeologists feel that only about 5% of the wall has been uncovered.
Sycamore Gap is a famous and most photographed spot along the wall. This is a picture of a souvenir magnet that we bought. This image was all over the gift shops along our hike. These are the two hills that I referred to when I was describing Twice Brood. The tree grew here naturally. It's in Northumberland National Park. And here's the tree in daylight. Up we go. A 10.6-mile hiking day with a 1,960-foot elevation gain, but most of it was in this area. This takes us to the highest point on the path, 1,132 feet above sea level. The wet stones caused some tricky footing that day.
Here are the ruins of another mile castle. At the time of Hadrian, there were about 15,000 soldiers, Roman soldiers, in Britannia, which was about 10% of the army. And they were guarding only about 4% of the land of the Roman Empire, which shows that this Britannia was pretty important to the Romans. The Roman soldiers built the wall and the forts, but auxiliary legions manned them, men from Belgium, Germany, Spain, Iraq, Syria, and other places. These people were not Roman citizens, but if they worked for 25 years, they may be given Roman citizenship. Here you see a group, maybe our group, coming down the sill. Sometimes it was so steep we actually used our hands to hold on to some rocks, but it was a really fun and challenging time at these times. Here's a long view of the sill. You can see there's a lake at the base, and there's a quarry at the base also, which you can't see.
You've all experienced unexpected sights while hiking. This one was at the entrance of the Roman Military Museum, which featured a movie on Roman fighting tactics. Perhaps those are puffballs? Sometimes we walked on easier terrain, felt good after the ups and downs of the sill. So cute. The hazards in the Adirondacks are rocks, roots, and runoff. But the most common hazard in the UK is sheep poop.
This was our last day walking along the original stone wall. What you see here is a kissing gate. Picture a fence that ends in a V with a gate swinging in between the arms of the V. To go through, you push the gate away from you. Then you sort of tiptoe around the end of the gate and then push it back so you can exit. But if there's somebody behind you who wants a kiss, this is the perfect time for it. We also came across honesty boxes. People would put out food and drink on a table or a cabinet or even in a small refrigerator. And you could take what you like and then pay for it by using the honesty box. This is the River Irthing bridge abutments. As you can see from the picture, this was a massive bridge with a guardhouse. This was where the stone wall ended and a turf and timber wall began in the original Hadrian wall. The River Irthing has changed its course, so it no longer flows alongside the abutments.
Because we hiked in pastures, we had to cross many fences and walls. Some other crossing structures that the British use are called stiles. Some are wooden ladders, you just go up one side and down the other. This one is unique. The stepping stones were long enough to be used on both sides. Lenore is about to step over the top and descend by the same stones on the other side. This is Lanarcost Priory, built in 1166. We hiked 9 miles this day. Do you recognize the stones in the arch in the priory? You got it, Hadrian's wall stones.
From the priory, we took a taxi to Brampton, a town which received its market charter in 1252. It is still a lively town with winding streets and old buildings. We stayed at the Howard Arms, a hotel that Dickens had stayed in. We were going to be here for 2 nights, so we did our laundry, and so we call this the Bob Cratchit Laundry. The next day, we continued walking through lovely villages and fields, and we came to an old church, St. John's Evangelist, built in 1864. We met a helpful gardener who led us into the church, and we really thought these windows were quite lovely. In the arched part, you can see cut glass stars, and above the stars is a stone-carved curtain or valance. That night on our way to dinner, we visited St. Martin's Church, which also had beautiful windows. In these windows, Jesus is a blonde. It seemed there was always something new that we didn't expect. We also met the High Sheriff of Cumbria. She was friendly and very proud of Cumbria and what it had to offer. And we also learned that she was from Long Island.
After walking 6 miles, we arrived in Carlisle, the other large city that we visited. It has 108,000 residents. Carlisle Cathedral was built in 1133 and named for St. Cuthbert, who we met in Durham. I like the starry design on the ceiling. Carlisle Castle was built in 1092. Because Carlisle lies close to the Scottish border along the River Eden. This border post was besieged by the Scots 7 times, but they all failed. Carlisle has a nice pedestrian area in the center. There's shops, restaurants, and buskers. You can see a building with a clock tower on it to the left. That's the old town hall, but it's now a visitor center. This is the Crown and Mitre Hotel, obviously. It's the most luxurious hotel that we stayed in. We stayed in an annex in the back. We spent several nights in Carlisle.
We now have 2 more days of our walking trip, and we have about 16 miles to go till the end at Beauneuf-on-Solway. We met a retired entrepreneur who would put in the name of a city or state that you were interested in and the mileage, and then take a photo with your camera so that you would have a nice memory of the hike. As you can see, Saratoga is 4,330 miles away to the west, and Wall's End is 83 miles to the east. Most of our walk was along the River Eden, and then when it became an estuary as well. This house, called the Bowness House, was built quite near the river. It was built from Roman stones and has a Roman decorative stone above its door and decorative Roman eagles on its roof. You may notice that it looks sort of like a fort or very fortified, and that's true. Because during the Middle Ages, people called the Reivers, not Reivers, the Reivers, were bandits, cattle rustlers, kidnappers, and pillagers. And they would come down from a Scottish area and do their thing. So the people had to live in very fortified homes. The final miles of our walk were along paths like this with flowers and woods. There were no ruins left for us to see, and actually archaeologists think that maybe the Romans thought a wall wasn't needed here because of the quicksand along the River Eden that would prevent the Irish and the Scots from coming down and raiding.
This is Solway Firth. You can see it's an arm of the Irish Sea. You can see the hills of Scotland in the background and a flock of European oyster catchers on the beach. We had hoped to walk on the beach like we did at the beginning of our trip, but the locals warned us not to because of the quicksand. We made it! After an easy 8-mile day, we came to the end of Hadrian's Wall path and the final stamping station. We were proud that we completed the hike, but sad to end it. Thank you for listening.